Mr. Rainwater.
Hey, Jow.
Happy Whistle Pig Day.
What is Whistle Pig Day?
Apparently, whistle pigs are actually another name for groundhogs.
Oh, do they whistle?
I did some research. Apparently, they do whistle when they're.
Oh.
Hold on a second. I've got the article in front of me. They eat vegetables and fruits and whistle when they're frightened or looking for a mate. And that's when they get called whistle pigs. Fun fact, I also just learned that groundhogs and woodchucks are the same thing.
So wait, groundhogs, whistle pigs, and woodchucks are all the same animal.
Yep, all the same thing. 3 different names. Didn't change a thing.
Now I know.
Yeah, did you know that? Did you know that woodchucks and groundhogs were the same thing?
I had no clue. I thought woodchucks were like some weird like beaver type thing.
Exactly. You know? And I'm starting to wait. Are beavers and woodchucks and groundhogs the same thing?
I think beavers are different.
Honest to God, if you put them in front of me, I probably wouldn't be able to tell a difference. Anyway, it's Happy Groundhog Day to everyone listening. Today we're talking about the art of folklore, or kind of just the nonsense of how things come to be American holidays.
America in particular is really good at that too. Like, not just how it becomes holidays, but how, like, a lot of what I like to think about is, like, how do stories come about? So, like, another great mutation of that idea is, like, tall tales, right? Like, you know, you had Paul Bunyan and John Henry and those particular figures who, on a certain level, you could go, okay, I can imagine that those people existed at some point, and then, like, people just started winding all these stories about them. They got, you know, playing telephone with each other. They got more and more exaggerated to the point that it's like, you know, Paul Bunyan could chop down 10 trees at once.
Yeah. And not to get too heavy right off the bat or draw the ire of some of our listeners, but I'm pretty sure that that's the whole deal with Jesus as well.
Right. Yeah.
All of, like, the religious figures and this and that. Like, I'm just curious to know who's the guy who got so drunk that he was like, I saw St. Nicholas. He took a bunch of deer and he flew off my roof. I just want to know how that came to be. But anyway, today we'll start the conversation around Groundhog Day and where the F this came from. Because much like a lot of the holidays in America, it's the fucking Germans that got this started. I mean, it's the Christians, but it was also something called Candlemas. Now, I didn't look more into that, but that was kind of the original thing where clergy would distribute and bless candles needed for winter. The candles represented how long and cold winter would be. The Germans expanded this concept by selecting an animal, the hedgehog, as a means of predicting weather. Once they came to America, German settlers in Pennsylvania continued the tradition, although they switched from hedgehogs to groundhogs, which were plentiful in the Keystone State. Now, I want to know at what point you can expand a concept. Because now I just want to start expanding the concept of different holidays and adding my own shit and being like, deal with it. And this is part of the tradition now. Because if you think about it, like, all these things, right, whether it was Groundhog Day originated in Candlemas or whatever, Christmas originated the winter solstice, Halloween, Samhain, All Hallows Eve, that kind of thing, right? They took something, they transformed it, and then we just kind of stopped.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we just kind of, we put it into a circle, or a hamster wheel, or a hedgehog wheel, or a fucking beaver wheel, whatever you want to call it today. And it just goes round and round and round. So at what point do we, either as a culture or as artists or whatevers, when do we add stuff to more holidays? Like, why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, when they're building this original folklore, who's the motherfucker that said, all right, I'm adding this? And everybody was like, all right. We'll go with it.
It's easy to add holidays. What's hard is getting the federal government to acknowledge your holiday, because a lot of... Go ahead.
I was going to say, not so much about adding my holiday, but expanding my holiday, as the Germans did.
Oh,
With,
I see.
do you know what I mean? Like somebody made beef stew, and then I said, you know what? I'm putting grape juice in this, and suddenly it became better. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what's the what's the criteria that I have to do? I have to fill out a form? Is there a petition I need to start online?
I think it is like some things kind of get stuck, or like would be another better way of putting it, like clarified to a point where it's like this is the tradition, right?
Yeah, right.
And that happens, I think, when people are they're kind of happy with what they have. But then also, I was thinking about this, and because you were making an analogy to recipes, right? So like,
As always,
in Louisiana, gumbo is one of those things where from household to household, a gumbo recipe is totally different. And there's a you can get into pretty big arguments on like how dark the roux should be. And like roux basically is like oil and flour. And you heat the flour to the point that you're getting it closer and closer to blackened, but you don't want to burn it, right?
okay.
And different people have different tolerance levels for how like dark that roux can get. And so you have different versions of the recipe to where you have family lineages that are like, look, we only make the roux this way. We don't want it like a velvety chocolatey brown. We want like a lighter brown. And we don't have tomatoes in our gumbo. And then there are people who exclusively make gumbo with tomatoes. And then you have you have gumbo recipes with okra. You have gumbo recipes with all kinds of different stuff, seafood, chicken, sausage. It's all different from place to place. And I think in a lot of ways, if you looked regionally, right, even within the United States, let alone worldwide, but different holidays are the same holiday is celebrated in different ways in different areas.
True.
So like something else that Louisiana does, which is Mardi Gras, which I think Louisiana is the only state, as far as I'm aware, that has like school holiday for Mardi Gras.
Yeah, we don't have that in Connecticut. I can tell you that for sure. And I know we didn't do that in Georgia either when we were in college.
There are no business holidays for Mardi Gras, but the school lets out for one day for Mardi Gras, usually. Maybe 2 days, depends. And that is like because in the state everybody acknowledges it as a major holiday because like everybody's parents are getting drunk that night. Like the other part of it is there are a lot of Catholics in Louisiana, so a lot of people also. Well, actually, this isn't related to the holiday part, but it plays into it. So a lot of people go to Ash Wednesday after Mardi Gras. So that's like the beginning of Lent. That's when they get the cross and ash on their forehead.
Correct. Yep.
And ironically, like schools don't take a break off for Ash Wednesday, but they do for Mardi Gras. So,
the separation between church and state, I guess.
I guess. And then on top of that, like a lot of schools also really traditionally will start serving fish on Fridays in the South, and I don't think that that's a thing that's typically done anywhere else in the country. So that's just one example, right? I was trying to do some research on this because one of my favorite historical characters, basically in U.S. history, is this guy named Emperor Norton. And so...
Did you say Edward Norton?
No, not Edward. Emperor.
Emperor
was
Norton.
A self-declared emperor of the United States.
He just decided he was the emperor? That's my kind of guy.
It's one of my favorite, like, American... Like, talking about tall tales, this is one of those that got very real in the sense of... this is a guy who, like, lived in San Francisco in the 1800s. So, like, in 1859, he proclaimed himself Emperor of the United States. And later, the Protector of Mexico, and he had like developed his own currency that people would accept. around like
Wow. What year was this?
1850. So this guy was ahead of the crypto train. Like he had made his own cryptocurrency.
This is amazing. I have no idea that this ever thing. What, did they just erase him from history?
He wasn't erased from history, but he was just this eccentric in San Francisco.
Was he rich? That's the real question. Because if he was rich, this makes sense.
He was no, as far as I'm aware, he was not rich. Like he was actually like fairly poor, as far as I'm aware.
So he wasn't eccentric. He was crazy.
He was crazy, but like San Francisco loved him. They adopted him, accepted him as their own, and I'm pretty sure there's a bridge named after him. But there's there's like a day dedicated to him in San
Holy
Francisco.
shit! I want a day.
Right? But that's that's like how that. There's a lot of folklore, right, that gets wound up into that. I'm sure, especially in regards to like, I'm sure if you were to ask people about, the historical stories in San Francisco about Emperor Norton, I'm sure it goes into the stratosphere, right?
Can you just give yourself that title, Emperor?
That's literally what he did. That's just like...
That's incredible.
That's why it's one of my favorite stories, because like, to me, that is a very odd form of performance art that he took to the nth level, like to just see how far he could go with it, right? And within the town, like within the city of San Francisco, they accepted it, right? That's San Francisco.
Just stop and think about what you just said. They just accepted it.
Yeah.
This dude said, "I'm the emperor. Here's my money." Like, they just said, "All right." Like, I want to do that. I just want to walk in like Minnesota and be like, "This is now Jow land. Here are my coins."
So I think in regards to the holidays, in regards to just creating that kind of poetic sentimentality around a given time or a person, a lot of the times it happens because somebody just has the tenacity to proclaim it and stick with it. And after a while, it just...
People stop fighting. Yeah, they don't put up a fight anymore.
Yeah, or they just, pass away and people are like, yeah, that guy was crazy. So
all right, so let me put you on the spot.
Yeah.
If you could change something about any existing holiday, what would you change? For which holiday?
Oh gosh.
Or all of them, it doesn't matter.
More drugs for Easter for sure. Like more orgies for Easter. Easter is like a viciously understated holiday. Like there's so much pagan affiliation with Easter, but same with Christmas. But I think in the United States, Christmas is so appropriately played up and just out of its... The way we treat it is sort of out of our minds in terms of sentiment and how we feel about it. Even a bad Christmas feels like a good Christmas. But Easter always feels like whatever. It just feels like the most whatever holiday. And it's really, from a storytelling perspective, it's like the big grand finale to what Christmas starts. Like Christmas should be like the prequel trilogy in Star Wars. We're like, okay. And Easter should be as the
OT.
big, yeah, it really should, because that's like all of the big thematic aspects.
Woo, we're saved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just the big thematic aspects of Christianity. It's like these huge thematic aspects of other religions that were pre-Christian. You can find those elements in the Egyptian mythology with Horus and Osiris. You can find it in Celtic mythology. You can find it in mythologies all across the world, because there's always, or fairly frequently, there is a resurrection figure, somebody who dies and returns. I believe Dionysus in Greek mythology was another figure like that. But originally Easter was supposed to be was from a pagan tradition a fertility rite. It was a fertility holiday, and it was supposed to be a point that marked the coming of spring, because it marks also a particular solar event, the vernal equinox. So it marks this transition from winter into spring, and this transition from, you know, having to save your food, hibernation,
Right.
being cold all the time, to like being able to re-enter nature. All the flora and fauna are coming back. So it should be this really, for me, I think of walking out in the sunshine on shrooms, like this very religious sort of ecstatic experience. That's how I'd like Easter to be. And right now it's very stale and very
dry ham,
it's
egg salad,
yeah. I mean, it's not even really a
pastels.
cake, you know? It's just like,
Oh, we have a cake. You don't have a bunny cake?
not really. Like we get
My
some
mother always
chocolates.
makes no. My mother always makes a bunny cake, and it's a weird. It's kind of a running joke in our family because the bunny cake always comes out looking kind of demonic. Because I don't know where I got my art gene from because I did not get it from either my mother or my father. But it's always kind of demonic, and it's an inside joke as to how bad the bunny cake will be that year. But without fail, there is always a bunny cake. And then, you know, you have the eggs, right? The eggs, and I'm not talking about the actual eggs. I'm talking about the plastic ones. Usually they have like chocolates in them and things like that. It's like milk chocolate. It's never dark chocolate or any kind of, you know what I mean? Like Easter doesn't have its own flavor.
It really
It's just
doesn't. And I feel like, because Halloween has a very specific, I feel like,
burnt pumpkin puree.
yeah, everybody gets Halloween when it arrives. Everybody gets Christmas when it arrives. Even Thanksgiving, which is
tastes like gravy and mashed potatoes.
yeah, and it's not like the biggest holiday ever, but everybody has an expectation for Thanksgiving that's pretty locked in.
Yeah.
But Easter, like I said, if I were in a state where like shrooms were decriminalized, that would be my practice once every year around Easter. This is the day I'm going to take shrooms and walk out into the forest or whatever.
Going on a vision quest.
Yeah, and reconnect with nature, basically. So
that's interesting. I never thought about that. I mean, I've never done a drug in my life, with the exception of happy caffeine.
Which is a hell of a drug in its own way.
That's true. It kept me up until about 2 a.m. last night, and I'd stopped drinking around like 9, and it lit me up. But either way, and that's weird considering how much caffeine I consume. The tolerance level for me should be better, but there was other things on my mind last night. Anyway, that's interesting. I never thought about infusing drugs into a holiday. I mean, you know, you hear about people drinking on Christmas Eve, and you know, I'm pretty sure there's a vast majority of people smoking pot on Halloween. Outside of that, well, you drink on St. Patty's Day and you drink on 4th of July.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, yeah, people drink on like Labor Day and Memorial Day, but it's not so much focused around the drinking. You know what I mean? It's just like a side set of the weather, right? Because that's kind of what just comes with the summer season. But drugs are not a part of any real actual holiday, with the exception of Halloween. I would say Halloween's a big pot.
Well, and
holiday,
I was gonna say, like, that's the case nowadays, right? Like all of the older pagan holidays, Halloween, Christmas, Easter, they all originated from some kind of rites, and every one of those like pagan rites involved, at least at some earlier point,
something or eating something.
Involved drugs for sure. And so I would say maybe this.
I don't think Jesus did shrooms, though. I just want to point that out.
Probably not. No, he probably didn't.
I mean, a part of me wants to go, how do you go from the resurrection of Christ to shrooms? And then the other part of me goes, well, somehow we went from the resurrection of Christ to bunnies and chocolate eggs.
Yeah.
Who the fuck came up with that? You know what I mean? It's like that Robin Williams bit. Rabbits don't lay eggs. What is this?
Well, and I was going to say, like, Jesus probably didn't do drugs, but he went out into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights not eating, not drinking, allegedly. You're going to hallucinate. You're going to go. True. You're going to see things. And that's oftentimes the reason why in a lot of religious traditions people do fast, because when you're in that state, it is a mind-altering state. You do fairly regularly. People report having some amount of visions, having an altered state, an altered mental state, because your body's basically going,
Panic.
oh, yeah, we got to survive. Like, we cannot put all of our energy to the brain right now. Like,
Yeah.
so,
It's you got to be like, you suddenly become, oh, did I see something moving? That could be food. You know what I mean? Like, you become
exactly.
a predator type. That's really interesting. I never thought
That's
about it. I mean, you
also,
could go ahead.
I was going to say also, like, that's also how you get a lot of those. This is kind of folklore, right? But it's based on actual perceptions people have, right? Because, like, there's this trope in a lot of movies where people are out in the desert and they see the shimmering heat in the distance and they're starving and they're thirsty and they start imagining oases and things like that. That's all kind of wrapped into the same thing. Like, that hallucinatory quality comes from that deprivation they're going through in the body. So it is a part of human existence that gets incorporated into art over time and gets incorporated into how we think. I'm sure how a lot of religious ideas came about too, right?
Absolutely.
It's easy to imagine that Moses came across the burning bush in a similar manner.
Well, I mean, you can argue that drugs and alcohol are different things, but alcohol alters your mind. You're not
Yeah.
in the same state you are when you're sober. So if Jesus is over here turning water into wine, he's into that. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
And there's no evidence to say that Jesus didn't smoke pot or do shrooms or trip on acid. Like,
Well, and when I hear that, I'm like, well, maybe Jesus was a chemist or something, or like maybe he was, you know what I mean? Like, maybe the historical figure of Jesus was a very intelligent person, or was Tesla or something, and knew how to, like.
I've always maintained that he became the David Blaine of his generation.
Exactly.
And was just like pulling magic tricks out of his ass. And people were like, he must be magic. And it's just like, that, you know what I mean? He just went with it because if he said, that was maybe his shtick. That's how he made his money. That's how he, found a place to sleep, or, that's how somebody got him to a table. And then, you got some of the stuff that might have been altered by other people, or you might have had stuff that he said or whatever, but he might have just been like some kind of wise man who had like a very Buddhist type mentality of, forgive people and do this and do that. And he kind of, I don't want to say swindled, but swirled his little magic tricks with his philosophy, and 1 + 1 = 2. And then all of a sudden, as we said before, it's the game of telephone. You know what I mean? Somebody takes it and it's like they hype it up so high, and then they feel like they tell you the story and the person wasn't impressed. So then you got to level it up just a little bit more. Right. And then the people are like, ooh, he is magic. Wow. And then at some point it just becomes the wheel, and it rolls over everything because people just repeat it because, Gutenberg invented a printing press, and, it starts coming out like that. It's like readily available to the masses and so on and so forth. It can't change because all of a sudden it's the word of God or whatever it may be. But I want to know.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can go ahead.
I'll say this last thing. So even going into the Christian religion itself, like, there were more gospels by other members. I'm trying to remember what the official term is. The other members of Jesus's posse, the apostles.
Yes.
And those books don't make it into the Bible because some of their reports don't all click together or meet each other face to face. So like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were the ones that were kept because they were the ones that were the most consistent in their accounts.
Okay.
But in reality, there are other accounts because you also have the Gospel of Judas. You have, I can't remember all the other apostles, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they all also had their own accounts of Jesus at the time, and they don't all match up. And so that's the Catholic Church doing what Disney did with the Marvel movies, which is streamline everything, right? Like, we want to make sure that this is presentable to as many people as possible where they're not asking questions about canon or continuity or whatnot.
Yeah, because once they realize how many holes there are, they're not going to buy the product.
Yeah. And so Sorry, I keep cutting you off because
No, it's
this
fine.
is actually a really fascinating topic to me and one that I think on a lot. Because something I like to think about a lot is like, what is the folklore of the future going to be based
Right.
on what we have today, right? So, like, for example, I think like let's say that there's some sort of civilizational collapse. People find like Pokemon, and they're like, these people seem to have access to these magical creatures that we can't find anymore. What happened to them? Some of
And
them
then
were
they're gonna find bones from a rabbit, and they're gonna go, "This was a Pikachu," and we're all gonna be like, "Fuck." But it's interesting, like, because I'm wondering like how things do get solidified. So I'm looking more at the Groundhog Day thing, and so much like any warm-blooded animal, they go into hibernation. Groundhogs in the fall, and their body temperatures drop. Is that cold-blooded? That doesn't make them a mammal, right? Or a warm-blooded?
This should be a warm-blooded mammal, but I mean, hibernation, I think, is that kind of it's a unique process to mammals that they can do that for. They can't do it forever, but
I only thought cold-blooded animals could drop their temperature significantly.
Well, cold-blooded animals, what it is they cannot regulate their temperature at all.
I didn't know that.
Mammals, the two big things for mammals is A, mammary glands, hence mammals, and then B, the ability to regulate interior temperature.
Huh. Okay. Well, their heartbeats slow from 80 to 5 beats per minute, and they lose about 30% of their body fat, which is crazy.
That is insane.
In February, male groundhogs emerge from their burrows to look for a mate, not to predict the weather, and then they go back underground again. So they bang and then they run back in the house and go back to bed. And then they come out from hibernation for good in March. So in 1887, a newspaper editor belonging to, and I shit you not, a group of groundhog hunters from Punxsutawney called the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club. Who knew you'd make a club about such a thing? Declared that Phil, the Punxsutawney groundhog, was America's only true weather forecasting groundhog. So basically, the press said it, and now it is. Like, that's just the way it came to be. And now people are like, oh, that's the way it is. So now people will travel, probably from even around the world, to go to fucking Pennsylvania to watch an animal get pulled out of a hole. And if there's overcast, it determines whether or not we have more winter. It's fascinating to me because we are now at a point in society where everyone knows there is no magic here. There is not, like, this is really no true indicator about what's going to happen. And yet people will set aside actual knowledge and go, well, he saw it, so it means what it means. And they'll actually like take it as the thing. And it's like, no, a groundhog club and a newspaper guy made some shit up. And now you're determining whether or not you're going to pack up your winter clothes or not off of this. Like, it's insane to me to believe that people actually will follow the folklore instead of what they know is true. Like, it used to be just kind of a fun thing, like a distraction, I guess, or something to fill up column lines on a newspaper. But now it's like, we got enough shit going on. We don't need to fill it in with this stuff. And it's weird that people will find comfort in things like this. Like, if you tried to say, let's get rid of Groundhog Day, there would be fucking people up in arms.
Sure.
Like, it would be trending on Twitter. And then you have other people who are like, we really don't need daylight saving times anymore. And there are still people who are like, we need it.
That's the one I think nobody will miss, though. Because daylight savings time feels like it's an artifact of a previous age. Like an age that didn't have GPS or like all of the different technological telecommunication systems that we have now. We are holding on to that one just out of pure tradition. And there was a point in time, right, where it was very useful. It was also the same kind of point in time where, like, the Farmer's Almanac was your main source of information for anything having to do with when the right time to plant and all that stuff is. Not that it isn't today, but there are also all these other, there's this other wealth of information that comes from the internet and how we can use that to our advantage.
Right. And that's what
in-
blows my mind.
It is mind blowing, but it's interesting because that's also, I would argue that's also in a lot of ways how other traditions get started, like the foundation of nations, as one, you know, especially if you going back into like talking about cryptocurrency and all that stuff before
Dogecoin. Dogecoin.
before the establishment of any sort of cryptocurrency, there was a point in time in American history where we decided that we weren't even going to back the dollar bill with gold anymore. We were just going to, on faith, say this dollar's worth $1, right? And due to the historical conditions in which that happened, people accepted it because there wasn't really a going back. They were in a position where, well, we either accept this or we have to fight the federal government on it. And when you're in the middle of a Great Depression, it makes it hard to do. It makes it hard to kind of push back on that. So we've been going through that for nearing 100 years. And the whole establishment of ideas like cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is to try and establish a new tradition in the same sort of light, right?
Yeah.
But with some more rules added on. Because I could easily make the argument that like Bitcoin is in itself a fiat currency, but what makes it, in other words, it's faith-based. It's not really backed by much.
Right.
But the reason
we know Dogecoin is, but go ahead.
Right. But the reason people put so much confidence in it is because there is an underlayer of like, we'll know exactly what's happening on this network no matter what. And it can't, you can't mess with it. You can't inflate it. You can't do all these things to it. And I feel like that's part of why people like those traditions so much, is it's something stable. It's something concrete, you know, and in a world that can be so chaotic. It's kind of nice to have like a Groundhog Day where you're like, okay, this is a very important day to me and my people because we're going to find out if there's going to be however many more weeks of winter, you know, because this is fucking Groundhog.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, what is there after? It's not that long from New Year's to Valentine's Day. It really isn't. It's a month and a half.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why we cling to that. Why we need Groundhog's Day to break up that monotony. You know what I'm saying? Like, because the weather is going to be what the weather it is. Like it's a common joke that the weatherman doesn't know what he's doing because they're constantly wrong. And so somehow we all said, hey, how about this animal and his shadow? Not like, does this animal still exist? Not something realistic like, oh, will the animal choose the celery or the carrot? No. Does he see his shadow? Like, where?
There must have been enough farmers who were like, yeah, you know, that Punxsutawney Phil, I believe in it, you know, to where over time it just kind of took off as a meme, basically.
But even then, like, you got to think about it. Like, when they were making this shit up, they still had overcast days. They couldn't they have said, well, we got to move it to tomorrow, or you know what I mean? Is that the gimmick? Oh, if it's cloudy on this day, so then why the fuck do we need the groundhog? Just look up. Oh, it's overcast. That means 6 more weeks. Like, I don't know why they have to have a mascot, but nobody's monetizing it. Obviously, well, that's not true, because Punxsutawney, like I said before, draws people from all around the world to see this stupid ass rodent get pulled out of a hole. That's tourism. That's money that goes into Pennsylvania. So obviously they're going to keep that shit going. So that's really what it becomes, is like a mascot for Pennsylvania. That's it. That's really all that it is.
Well, it's the same sort of like, you know, Old Faithful in Yosemite. Like, the reason it got its name is because it not exploded, spurted
Geysers.
on geysered in regularity, right? But it took a while for people to notice that. And I have to wonder, like, how many years did that go on until somebody was like, hey, have you ever noticed that this geyser goes off, like, I don't know how long, I don't know how regularly it goes off,
Yeah.
but like whatever it is, like every couple hours or whatever. And so they started to give the name, and the name is what becomes, the name is what
brand.
that's what identifies the folklore, right? Like, same with Punxsutawney Phil. Because how many generations of Punxsutawney Phil are there now? You know, there's probably hundreds at this point.
I want Punxsutawney Phil in the next Santa Claus movie. They listen to me. They had the Tooth Fairy, and they had Father Time, and they had Mother Nature, but they did not have Punxsutawney Phil. And I feel like that is an essential character in the holiday landscape that needs to be represented, along with St. Patrick. Right? They didn't have him in the movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know any. St. Patrick's Day is one of those holidays where I don't know anything. You know,
Snakes.
in regard. Yeah, that's it. Like, I think he cast like the snakes out of Ireland or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And then everybody just drinks because there's an Irish stereotype that Irish people are drunks.
It does seem like one of those folklore, like a bit of folklore that's probably pretty thick with like interesting things. Because I'm sure there's more to St. Patrick than just casting out snakes. I'm sure he had a wily.
Same thing with St. Nicholas. Like, he did not, to just go around handing out presents and stuff. I mean, he was a very charitable saint, but there was other things about him that he did, and I'm sure he's probably up in the clouds going, what the fuck is this shit? Like, you know what I mean? It's just interesting. Imagine you, Matt Rainwater, thousands of years from now, and someone finds Graj Raja, or not Graj Raja, Trailer Park Warlock.
Sure.
And they think that's the religion. And they're like,
oh, I mean, that's me and Austin's intention for Bat Monster. We totally made it as something that we hope that one day, like, a future civilization will find and think it's some sort of occult, like, mythology or religion of some insane people that lived during this time. But that's to me, that's part of the fun of it is allowing. Because what that is it's like organic evolution of art, right?
Yeah. And storytelling. Sure.
Yeah. And that, I feel like, is how a lot of folklore happens. It's this organic mutation over time of maybe an originating story or event. And as people add on to it or subtract from it, it takes on different forms. So Christmas, right? If you could celebrate Christmas as all the forms it's ever been, that would be a wild holiday. Because it would be a holiday that's like, first you're going to do some drugs, there's going to be an orgy, then you're going to like watch, all these movies. You're going
to go cut down a tree.
Yeah. You're going to have pie at some point. Like, it's
crazy.
Cool. It would.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it'd be cool to know how these events evolve over time.
Well, see, and that's what I was just about to point out, because we're joking about things in the future finding pop culture and art from today, but if you look at a lot of things that are actually very popular, right, in pop culture, no pun intended, you look at something like Superman, and is that not the next step of Moses?
Oh yeah.
Right? They took the base story of Moses, they made it with aliens, and then they put some red underwear on him and a cape, and suddenly he's doing all kinds of different things. And now, you know what I mean, like, less people probably believe in Moses or like religion type stuff.
Yeah.
And more people follow the philosophy of Superman, where it's like, no, do good things, stand up for moral causes and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So like, when, like, if my kid ever asks me, he's like, oh, blah, 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 religion. And I'll be like, well, I'm more of a Batman guy. Like, you know what I mean? I see a problem and I want to put on black and punch it. And then, that kind of gets carried on. And eventually, I mean, in 1,000 years, who's to say that the Bible will even be remembered?
Sure.
That, you know what I mean? Like suddenly Superman comics are the original texts, and you know what I mean? Like or, Superman becomes what Jesus is. And people are like, oh, Superman never existed. There's no proof that Superman existed. People are like, oh, there's books. And they talk about all the things that he did where he was flying around and he did all this stuff. And then some artist comes along and says, wow, that Superman concept's really great, but I want to take it a step forward and I want to create this other thing. And they do. And then that's just like the pop culture of that time. Like, I feel like those are the stepping stones. So who knows what came before Jesus, right? That inspired Jesus.
I mean, before Jesus, there have been a lot of people who have done a fair amount of research and digging into this idea. And there is some evidence to suggest that Jesus had a lot related to this mystery cult that was taking place in the Roman Empire at the time. That was a cult for this figure named Mithras. And I don't know a whole lot about Mithras, but it was a very similar, like, died and then came back sort of thing. And it was like a fertility cult.
Interesting.
And it was another one of those. I'm trying to remember. Like, I can't remember if Mithras was also related to like sun symbolism or not. But point being, a lot of people. So the attitudes of a lot of people in the Roman Empire would be different from how we think of it maybe today. So to be in a cult was just considered to be part of a church, right? So the mystery cult of Mithras was probably a little bit more like a Masonic lodge or something like that. Basically an excuse for men to get away from their wives. But point being, a lot of the stories and mythologies that were passed around at those times do get passed along. Basically what you're saying, they do get passed along into other creeds.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Zeus before Jesus?
Yeah.
And so Hercules is kind of Jesus 1.0, no?
Yeah, to a certain
half
extent.
Half man, half God, doing all these incredible things.
Not just Hercules. Zeus had a bunch of kids from a bunch of different rapes. I mean, for lack of a better word.
I'm not laughing at the concept of rape. I'm laughing at the idea of Zeus raping.
Well, and
just because I know Zeus didn't exist, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, within Greek mythology, that was basically a lot of Zeus's stories, and he had a lot of the demigods, right? Hercules, I think Perseus. There's a bunch of them. I can't remember all their names.
Yeah.
But a lot of the heroes in Greek myth were people who were either children of Zeus or children of other gods who had children with human women or vice versa. So that was a pretty old concept. And you can go further than that if you want to get into Sumerian myth, if you want to get into like stories about the Anunnaki. That kind of gets into ancient aliens territory a little bit, but you get stories of people from outside the world who came to Earth, had children with Earthlings, and then those children were giants or other just people with abnormal talents or whatever. And either it was an explanation for why those people might have had those abnormal talents. They might have been just mutants like an X-Men or whatever. Or they could have just been folklore in themselves, right? And the folklore just adds on and adds on and adds on.
There's so many variables. It's the game of telephone. It could have been the David Blaine, Chris Angel factor. Yeah. It could have been X-Men. It could have been a bajillion different things. It could have just been the fact of human evolution. You know what I mean? Like one person's kind of walking over hunched and it's like, no, did you see Dave? He could walk straight. Like he could stand up tall. And you know what I mean? Like that to them is a superpower. It's like, wow, his back does that. And all of a sudden it's some crazy thing that is, did you hear Dave? He was tall. He's like really tall. And then the other guy is like, yeah, he was taller than a tree. And then he tells somebody else and it's like, no, he was taller than my house. And that's how that shit gets out of hand. And I don't know how we went from groundhogs to basically shitting all over religion, but the point of the matter is it's very interesting to me to see the escalation that happens in storytelling, right? Because you have artists and we're all on that constant search of trying to find something original, right? And we want it to be unique and try to kind of differentiate it from other things that are occurring or already existing. And it's that kind of Hollywood studio mentality that a lot of us kind of succumb to at some point where it's like bigger is better. And you just start escalating things about it. And it's like a game of telephone and you really got to sell it because we're all trying to make a buck off of our ideas. And if it's small, no one cares. That's the sad truth about it. You really have to have something in your face, big, crazy, in order to really hook people's interest. And that's kind of what happens with a lot of these things, this folklore. It's just like, there's no line. Every time we hit the line or the ceiling, they move it. You know what I mean? The goalpost moves a little bit further, and it's like, at some point, we got to stop.
Well, also, I think what happens is just that perspective shifts over time, and people's expectations on like what is to be expected from a heroic figure change, because what we think of heroic figures nowadays may not be the same as what like the Greek culture thought of heroic figures.
Yeah.
Like just
what you're describing, just because I can see you're struggling to put it into words. What you're describing is something that I pitched online. I forget who, what, when, or where. It was on a message board, probably in like 2007. I pitched this idea of a movie about Wolverine, where because he lived through so many ages or so, or at least from what I know from the movies, I don't actually know about Wolverine, the X-Man. The idea of him as a character struggling with what a hero is, because in one time, him being a brutal warrior, just slashing throats, cutting off heads, killing people left and right, is celebrated. And then 2 or 3 decades later, when he hasn't really aged and society's moved forward, that's not the hero anymore. Do you know what I mean? And that's a struggle that I would see a character kind of facing. And that's kind of what you're talking about, where it's that progressive mentality of civilization and humanity, where it's like, well, no, we're going to move away from that. You know, like this is better. This is better for everybody.
A great example of that is the attitude that people had towards war in previous centuries. So a lot of the attitude towards war for easily from 16th century to 18th century was that it was this big event, this moment for a young man to step up and find his courage and find himself in battle.
Yeah.
And then there was a particular moment that shifted, and that was in World War I, when you had the introduction of industrial grade weaponry. You had machine guns, you had poison gas, you had biological warfare introduced, and it was at that moment that people realized this is no longer about hand-to-hand combat. This is no longer about seeing your enemy eye to eye.
Yep.
Because that was the part of it in the past that I think people really
very samurai mentality, where it's just like a man and his sword versus a man and his sword. Whereas this is like, hey, if you fucking breathe in the wrong direction, you're done. There's nothing brave about that. You know what I mean? There's no honor in standing around and suddenly getting massacred by an automatic weapon that's, hundreds of yards away or something. It's like, at what point, what are we doing here anymore?
Right. And by the time the atomic bomb was introduced, that was the moment at which it became harder to conceive of war as anything other than a self-annihilating venture. Not to say that there can't be war in the future, but everybody approaches it very differently now.
they
Go ahead.
still try and push that mentality. Be all that you can be. You know what I mean? And it's very simple-minded to accept that, where it's like, no, all you can be cannot stop an atom bomb. Like you're not gonna do it. You can defuse a bomb if you're smart enough and stealthy enough and this and that. But if you're just a guy with a rifle, bro, go home.
Sure.
Go home.
Well, and the nature of warfare has changed completely because of all that too. Where now the size of any, well, I would say my comparison is United States military, which is very different from a lot of other militaries in the world because it maximizes the individual and it maximizes small units to a point where you're having people do maximum damage with minimal use of resources, quote unquote. I mean, the military budget is gigantic in the United States, right? But the point is the United States came to a conclusion that, especially after Vietnam, that we are not going to be able to do the draft thing anymore. Like, it's not popular. It's not, people don't want to go to war. If we try and do it, we're going to deal with destabilization of our country.
Which is what you don't want during a wartime.
Right. And so now we have an all-voluntary force. And in that all-voluntary force, people who go into it take on it as a job, which means they're training, they're learning, they're doing this in a way where they're basically becoming a machine. Whereas I think in comparison, something like World War I and World War II, the attitude was more, we just need to get as many bodies out there.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be able to perfectly train all these men.
We're need human shields that might shoot back occasionally. Yeah.
We're going to play the odds game here.
Honest to God, I want your thoughts on this. I don't know how we got so far off topic, but I'm of the belief that we're not fighting with weapons anymore. We're fighting with money. Because I was reading this article, and I think maybe even you responded to it on Twitter, where China is kind of invading or taking over parts of South Africa by granting credit towards the South African government, and when they can't pay their credit card or whatever you want to do, their loans, China takes not necessarily possessions, but like land and ports and airports and things like that from them because they can't pay their debt. And in a way, they're invading through money, right? Like they're using money as the weapon now. And I think that's like the next stage of it, which is interesting when you go back to the whole cryptocurrency thing, because then it's like, well, that's just like a completely foreign nation now, right? If you look at cryptocurrency like that, because didn't China ban cryptocurrency?
And well, they banned mining of it. You can apparently still possess it, but you can't mine it anymore in China. And they're going to be making their own currency at some point.
A cryptocurrency.
Yeah. And so going into this is actually this has been one of the big selling points for something like Bitcoin or something. A lot of other cryptocurrencies, but I think Bitcoin's the big one that gets pushed, is this idea that you can undercut basically national imperialism. Because not only China, a bunch of countries do this. The United States does it. Russia does it. It's the idea of using your currency as a weapon by leveraging it over people. And the idea with Bitcoin is that you're not, because you can't change the value of that currency in terms of like inflating it or printing more or whatever. The value of it always stays the same, at least in regards to what is possible for people to have. So there's only going to ever be 21 million Bitcoin, and you can divide it into all these smaller parts, but that's it. There's no more that can be done. So you can at least take out that form of imperialism out of the equation. And so people are trading amongst each other more freely. That's the idea. I think that unfortunately right now it hasn't taken the world by storm, and I think the way Satoshi Nakamoto hoped it would. But it may also be more time before that happens. But the point is like, should Bitcoin meet Nakamoto's potential, which that in itself is folklore, right? Like Satoshi Nakamoto is a folklore figure. We don't know who he actually is. That was a pseudonym he came up with. And so he's just like this completely imaginary. He might be he's just, this is a completely imaginary figure who might be the CIA for all I know. And like, I mean,
we
really.
have gone in full conspiracy mode now, but go ahead.
But came up with this idea for digital currency, and it was one that people were so compelled by that it was rapidly adopted. And with any luck, you know, maybe in 10 years, the majority of people around the world will be trading using it and will create less pressure amongst nations to try and outdo each other using money as like a weapon, like you were saying.
Right.
And so I guess the last thing I want to say in regards to this whole little ramble, I think that not only was Nakamoto's idea of using like having a pseudonym just to hide their identity, I think it was also to build like a folklore aspect to it. Because then when you have sort of a mythological element to it, it adds an additional allure to the whole thing. Because that is the thing to me. Like, I mean, I own a certain amount of Bitcoin, and part of the reason I own it is there is an allure to that story. Dogecoin's funny, right? But there's not a hidden figure who came out of nowhere and just, you know, presented almost like Prometheus this idea to humanity.
Well, Elon Musk kind of made that himself, right? Didn't he kind of make himself the patron saint of Dogecoin?
Yeah, he did. He did. And he's kind of used it in a way that I might describe as tyrannical to a certain extent. Or at least chaotic, you know? Like, there's a lot of mischief in the way that he's used Dogecoin. In comparison to Satoshi Nakamoto, who just introduced the idea and then disappeared. And to me, that is extremely compelling. Because that means this person believed in this idea so much that they were willing to just let go of it and let it take its own life and see if it takes off, if it doesn't take off. And that still remains to be seen, right? We don't know. But we're seeing that drama play out in real time. And that, to me, is, like, incredibly compelling.
Kind of like Emperor Norton. Just deciding something and putting it out there. Although he stayed around for the glory.
Well, and, like, going back to the nation-building thing is, like, that's the same thing that, like, the founders of the Constitution did in the United States. They just decided, like, that's, like, the Declaration of Independence is basically, like, hey, we've decided, like, we just don't want to do this, like, England
we're
thing.
Done. We're done.
Yeah, fuck off. Like, that's literally all it is.
Which is, you know, and that's the kind of thing where I look at and I don't want to get into a whole debate about this, because no matter what we say, somebody will be ready with the Tarzan feather. But when you look at something like gender nonconformity today, where it's like everybody's just like, well, I'm going to make up my own gender. And people are like, no, it's tied directly to your sex. And other people are like, well, why? Why can't I just make something up?
Yeah.
And the artist in me is very much like, well, fuck yeah.
Yeah,
and then,
that's how I feel too. I'm like, yeah, do it. I don't care.
Do whatever the fuck you want. There are really no rules here. And then the other part of me is like, well, we should kind of figure this shit out so we're all on the same page. But
sure.
You know what I mean? There's a dichotomy in my brain where that I'm constantly at war with myself trying to figure that kind of shit out. But the point that I'm making is there really are no rules. Everything is made up. It's a construct that was formed by society because everybody got on board with it and just said, all right, let's go. Emperor Norton. Okay, go. Cool. Go. Zeus and Hercules and all that. Okay, let's go. Jesus, let's go. And, you know, like right now it's kind of political parties. It's like, well, this party's wrong and that party's right and this and that. And it's like the people on the certain sides are like, all right, let's go. And it bothers me that no one questions shit because we're still over here worshiping a groundhog And people think they know how to run the country from their basements. Like it's mind-boggling to me that we let this kind of mentality that creates folklore just run our lives. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's just so crazy.
Well, when you were talking about that, it also sparked this thought that I was having, or I was thinking about two particular figures, and one of them I can't quite remember his name, but the one that I think about with fair regularity and who regularly runs as a presidential nominee is Vermin Love Supreme. So
is this like a Tiger King situation?
Not a Tiger King situation, more like an Emperor Norton. He's more within an Emperor Norton sort of camp of intrigue. He's an American performance artist, politician, and activist who has run as a candidate in various local, state, and national elections in the United States. He serves as a member of the Libertarian Party's judicial committee. That
explains it. Okay.
Yeah. Supreme is known for wearing a boot as a hat and carrying a large toothbrush. And has said that if elected president of the United States, he will pass a law requiring people to brush their teeth. He has campaigned on a platform of zombie apocalypse awareness and time travel research and promised a free pony for every American. Unironically, I have voted for him as like. I'm
not laughing at you. This is
I think it's funny too. Because I am like, you know what? This is the change we need in this country.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I've written in votes for General Zod, but this is like a whole nother level. There is something respectable about being an absurdist where, you know what I mean? Like you really do. It's that Joker tendency. And I'm not talking about our buddy Matt. I'm talking about like that. The concept of the Joker where it's like, nothing really matters. We're all going to fucking vaporize into the sun one day anyway. Yeah. Who cares? Let's just have fun while we're here.
Well, do you remember, I think this was in 2016, people were starting to do this like joke of like meteorite or something like that, like world-ending meteor for president or whatever, because a lot of people were just fed up with how things were going.
I vaguely remember this. Yes, I think it was right after Coney 2012.
The other political candidate that I was thinking about, and this was for prime minister in Britain, was Lord Buckethead, and this was a person who
I do remember this.
You've probably seen this person because I think they had a fairly viral moment, on social media. But very similar to Vermin Supreme, where his goal is basically to kind of be satire to the process and to use the political process as like performance art to make a point, and to make a point about how absurd the process is, how absurd a lot of the candidates are, and how, I mean, for me, like I smile at the absurdity that, a guy who wears a boot on his head is probably going to be a better president than, most of the presidents I get to pick from.
Yeah.
Any given election.
Here's my thing about absurdists and satirists when it comes to this. I look at them like fire. Okay. Necessary, but dangerous.
Sure.
Because, and this happened to me a couple months ago. So in the 80s and the 90s, much more like the 70s and the 80s, around like the time of the Zodiac, and like hippies were starting to become a thing in the 80s, and cocaine and all this kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
People were very on edge about Satanists, right?
Oh, yeah.
They were very, like, everything was like you'd spin a record backwards and it's like got Satanism in it or whatever. And they were very scared to death of this shit. And it was kind of like modern day witch hunt type shit. And at some point, I don't know when, maybe the late 90s. I don't feel like it was during the Columbine type era. I think it was more like the early 2000s. The people started doing like the Church of Satan, where they were trolling the whole thing. And it was like, they constructed a statue of Satan and like all these other kinds of things. And they have like the Book of Hell or whatever maybe. The whole thing was completely troll. They were just trolling Christianity.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because the Church of Satan had done this thing where they had I can't remember the exact details, but they had gotten it passed such that Oklahoma had to build a statue. They called it, it's not a statue of Satan, it's a statue of Baphomet. And, you know, on each side is a child right next to the Ten Commandments. And basically their argument was that it was a breach of freedom of religion that they weren't able to have themselves represented, right?
Right.
Which to me, I look at that and I'm like, well, you're kind of doing the Lord's work, because essentially, if we in the United States do believe in not only separation of church and state, but for people to have freedom to express whatever religious feelings they have, there should be whatever, you know, there should be Zeus standing out there too, or like, you know, some a Hindu god or goddess.
But see, the thing that blew my mind was the Church of Satan kind of started as a troll move.
Yeah.
And then a couple months ago, I think I was watching on the last drive-in with Joe Bob. There was some movie, and of course, you know, there were Satanists or whatever, because it was from the 70s, 80s or whatever. And I run my smart-ass mouth cracking jokes on Twitter while this is happening. People who are legitimate, and I put that in quotes, legitimate Satanists were offended by me, told me off, unfollowed, and blocked me on Twitter. And I'm like, how is this happening? Your entire religion is a troll move.
Well, okay, here's the thing. So, it is worth noting that there are the troll Satanists, right? Who, I think that's the Church of Satan, where they exist as basically a political party. They're basically libertarians with a little bit of like dramatic, dramaticism to them. And then there's the Temple of Satan. I think that's the two differentiations. If memory serves me correct, Temple of Satan, they're like the sincere Satanists, like actually worship Satan.
That's mind-blowing.
Right. That's the thing about religion, because there's not like.
Well, we have it happening again already, because there's already fucking Jedi temples.
That's true.
That started as just like a fandom move, and now people really think that they're fucking Jedi. Like, that's why I go back to, I believe that those kinds of things are like fire. They're necessary, but dangerous, because after a while, you either have to put a fire out or you have to keep it under control. But if you don't and it gets out of hand, the whole house burns down and you're with nothing. But you do need fire to cook and keep warm, and you know what I mean? Like, they're necessary, but
what you're talking about here too is sort of, what is the difference between like the Satanism thing and like Punxsutawney Phil, right? Why hasn't Punxsutawney Phil gotten to a point where there's like a cult who worships Punxsutawney Phil?
Do we know that there isn't, though?
Well, that's true.
I haven't Googled that hard, but I'm sure there's a Facebook group where it's like, you know, all hail Punxsutawney.
Sure.
Who the fuck? No, and even it's just like it's.
And
like
I'm sure there were people who in San Francisco who accepted like Emperor Norton's bills were like, yeah, I can probably get something for this, you know. And then later we're like, I'm just donating to this guy. This is a weirdo.
Hold on a second. I'm gonna try and Punxsutawney Phil cult. Let's see. Well, I mean, technically, the thing that started it, the Punxsutawney Groundhogs Club, is the first thing that pops up, and before it even lists what it is, the tagline is "Be a part of something great." If that's not a cult hook line, I don't know what isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's the cult hook line, but.
Oh, wait! Here we go. This famous groundhog has an inner circle of followers.
Okay.
The famous groundhog has an inner circle of followers, and they're honestly crazy. Hold on. I'm reading. Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania may be the only place on Earth where once a year a rodent is transformed into a makeshift meteorologist. On February 2nd, people from all across the U.S. and Canada make their way anxiously to see whether or not Punxsutawney Phil has seen a shadow. The annual tradition is derived from the Pennsylvania Dutch superstition that if a groundhog sees a shadow, 6 more weeks of winter, and if it doesn't, it will be in early spring. With that said, Punxsutawney Phil is the world's leading famous groundhog in all of history, and just like any other celebrity, he has his own inner circle to make sure he's living his best life as possible. But these people are honestly kind of nuts. This is an actual article. I'm not saying that. First of all, Phil has a bride named Phyllis.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm scrolling. I'm sorry. This is terrible for live podcasting, but
It's okay.
John Griffiths has been a member of Phil's Inner Circle. I guess that's the name for the cult. For more than 20 years, and his duties make him sound more like a personal assistant than anything else. Griffith cuts up fresh veggies to ensure Phil is eating healthy, balanced his diet, but he's also responsible with handling fuzzy meteorologist on his big day. I don't know how that's different than any other pet owner. Okay, maybe this is just like a Onion article, and I've clicked on the wrong thing.
Uh-oh. Well, we'll accept it. We'll accept on some faith that there is at least probably one person in the United States who really accepts Punxsutawney Phil as this weather god. And that... What?
Here's the crazy part. I'm getting there. I just had to read it. I'm sorry. Instead, it is said a way to honor. They dress nice on Groundhog's Day, not because they're on TV, because it is a way to honor and pay tribute to Phil's stature. Some members of the inner circle even consider him to be the king of the animal kingdom. And in more than 130 years of Punxsutawney Phil's weather forecasts, the handlers all suggest there is only one Phil and that a special elixir of life has kept him going throughout the years.
Oh my God.
The elixir is said to be pretty potent, with just a sip adding 7 years to Phil's life. The recipe for said mixed drink is top secret and is passed down from handler to handler. This is insane. Apparently, this is legit.
Well, God bless them.
And they also... Oh my God, they speak to him through whistles, clicks, and other groundhog noises. Okay, so I've confirmed my point. It's fucking insane the way people approach anything of any kind of celebrity stature ever. Ever. It's like there are, and I think, I don't know if we did this episode or not yet, but I know it was on the list. When fandom goes too far, sure. Right? It's like at what point do you draw the line, especially when we're creators? Like, at what point do you say, hey, guys, it's just a movie? Like, I know the argument where, like, I think it was Patton Oswalt or somebody made a stand-up joke where they were like, well, it's not just a movie. Like, this saved me. You know what I mean? You got the thing from the movie, your music saved me and all this kind of stuff. I get that. Art can have that kind of a powerful impact. But worshiping is a whole nother thing. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. It's one thing to be saved by somebody. Like, if somebody, jumped in front of a bullet to save my life, and then I found out that person was a member of the Klan, does that mean I joined the Klan? That's where you start to draw the line. It's like, wow, man, I thank you so much. Can I help out with your car loan or something like let me help you out or whatever. But then you find out like other things, and it's like, no, I'm going to go with him because he jumped in front of a bullet. Like, there's got to be a line for that and for this, because legitimately these people think that this is one groundhog that has survived over 100 years, and it's insane. That's insane.
I think there's an element of human psychology that desires to, and this comes from some thoughts that music producer Brian Eno had come up with, but there are some desires that I think a lot of people have to surrender themselves to something bigger than themselves. That's often what leads to like a religious impulse or like fandom or whatever. People want to be part of something bigger than themselves, right? Like people
Sure.
want to give themselves up in some moment of whether it's ecstasy or profundity or whatever,
Yeah.
so that they can
Well, it's a
disconnect from ego,
yeah, it's a
basically.
security blanket of the mind, I guess you could say, where it's like, it's out of my hands.
Which to
It's
me, I'm fine with when you have the consciousness of like, oh, I'm consciously actively doing this for this moment, and I'm going to return to like a normal state when it's all done.
yes,
Which
right.
is the point of a ritual or a rite or a holiday, is that you can disconnect from what you would call the real world and then go into this bigger than life moment and then come back, because you still have to come back to work. You still have to like farm or whatever it is that you're doing, right? To take care of yourself and your loved ones. But amongst that day-to-day drudgery, it's easy to get caught up in it and to think, oh, well, this is all there is to life. And then somebody comes along and says, well, I'm part of the Jedi Knight Council. And you start to think, oh, well, that sounds a lot more fun than
Yeah.
pulling turnips all day. I think I might join the Jedi Knight Council and see what I'll learn there.
I mean, don't
And
get me wrong. Spend your time how you want. It's just,
yeah,
I don't know. It's a rodent, and it comes out of a hole, and the sun. I don't know. I think it's creative how someone came up with this. I would
yeah,
really like to have seen the formidable moments, because at one point there was a farmer who saw a groundhog and said, "Oh, it's got a shadow today. Oh, that's bad news." Like, it's just some made up shit that he made up that morning. And then the next year he was like, "Oh, he saw his shadow this year again." And he was telling his kids as like a story at the dinner table or something. And it kept going and going and going, like the Energizer fucking bunny. And here we are, awaiting the day every February where somebody pulls a rodent out of a box and says, "Look, weather." That's it. But yeah, okay, I guess we could cut that off, because we could talk about this for hours. Hours.
it
Hours.
is. I think. Well, and I think that it is at the heart of art making, right? To do stuff that is bigger than yourself. That will. I mean, a lot of people have also made art to make something that outlives them, like statuary, sculpture
Absolutely.
was the big thing for a long time in human history, because of the idea that you could make something that was just going to
Yeah.
outlast you by potentially millennia, right? Or like, look at the pyramids. Like, they've been around for forever and will be around for a long time, because the people who built them had some understanding, at least, that these were things that could survive a lot. I mean, barring something horrible, but like, the point is art for a lot of people is a means to immortality, or it's a means to I guess, for lack of a better word, like power. A way of making yourself known or feeling acknowledged in a way that you wouldn't normally.
See, and I'll tack onto that, because whenever I write a script, that's actually how I find some comfort. Where I come to the mindset of, if I die, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, and I've written a script, I'm like, well, at least I got that script there, and maybe I didn't get to produce it, but maybe somebody will find it one day and they'll make it.
Yeah.
And as long as I get that script done, I can make peace with it. You know what I mean? Like, if it
Yeah.
never became a movie, I die with the knowledge of, maybe my kid will, slap his name on it and put it in film festival contest or whatever, and some producer will be like, this was great, I want to make this, and then they sell it for money, and then it gets made, and it's a story, and it lives forever. And part of me finds solace in the idea that I contributed. It's not so much about power, but it's that I contributed to society, to humanity, that maybe I felt, or maybe I made someone else feel not so alone, like they felt like they were related to my work. I don't know if I would want them to come to that cult of mentality where of like super uber fandom.
Yeah.
But to me, it is solace to know that, maybe it would be, like you said, provide some kind of temporary reprieve from the monotony or the struggles of day-to-day life. And that to me is like the overarching aim of my creative spirit, where it's like, I just want to get this out here. I don't care what form it takes. If it stays in a script, if it goes into a cartoon, if it gets made into a movie, whatever, if somebody adapts it into a novel, I don't care. But it's there. It's tangible. It exists. And it will live when I'm gone. And I don't care, like, if people say, wow, he was really great after I'm dead. I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to me or whatever. But it does matter to me that it's at least available for someone to read it and go, wow, I really relate with this guy. Like, I look at quotes from people who are famous that have been long dead, and I'm like, wow, I had that exact same thought 3 months ago. And this guy had that thought, and I've never heard that before. And now I feel like I'm in tune with Albert Einstein or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's definitely some kind of a solace. So I guess that's kind of why we do what we do, especially with folklore, is like passing those stories on and letting them live to comfort other humans. I guess that's the way to do it. And so I guess if you were comforted today by Punxsutawney Phil seeing his shadow, I'm happy for you. I really am. I want to know your mindset and how your brain works, and if you talk to your pets, and if your pets have any magic powers like this. But I don't know. I think there's some things that need to be held on to and some things that need to be let go. I think Punxsutawney is definitely one of them, but he makes money for Pennsylvania, so I don't see him going anywhere for a while.
Right. Any
final thoughts, Mr. Rainwater?
Oh, no, I think that's a good way of wrapping it up. Folklore is, like I said, it's one of the things that's at the heart of art making. It's making something that's bigger than its origins.
All righty. Happy Whistle Pig Day, everybody. We'll see you.
Good night.